So when you get into the flow of becoming, now you've heard that expression before, haven't you? Go with the flow. We want to explain to you exactly what the flow is. The flow is, you were non-physical energy. You were thought flowing. And when your thought was flowing from that broader non-physical perspective only, you were flowing in the vibration of well-being only. So now, as you are living life experience, you have variety and contrast, which helps you to know what you do not want, which causes you to launch a rocket of desire about what you do want, whether you speak about it or not. And in the moment that that rocket exudes from you, source energy flows with that rocket. Now that's going with the flow. Source energy flows in the direction of what you, worthy, genius, creative being, has concluded from this working environment, which helps you conclude. And source in its wisdom knows that no one could choose better or more accurately than you right there standing on the leading edge of your life. You know when you're rude, you'd rather not be. You know when someone is rude, you'd rather them not be. You know when you're sick that you want to be well. You know by what you're living, what you prefer. And we want so much for you to leave this gathering trusting that you are in the place to know, because source so much knows that you are in the place to know that source goes with the flow of what you vibe out of your experience. But now, are you going with the flow of your own desire? Many of our physical humans don't even get that it's all right to go with the flow of your own desire, because you believe that somebody else should be figuring out what flow you should go with. Shouldn't I dig up some old relic, some record, some history of someone who lived long ago, and shouldn't I go with their flow? We don't think so. You can't even figure out what their lives were like to which those answers were being given. When you go with the flow of your life experience, you're going with the flow of the source energy that flowed into this body. You're going with the genius creator that identified what you want from where you stand. How good is that? And now you're going with the flow of source energy, who is now vibrationally at one with that which you have become. You have within you a navigational system, a guidance system, an emotional guidance system that helps you to understand whether you are going with the flow or not. And in very simple terms, when you feel glorious, you're going with the flow. When you feel interested, you're going with the flow. When you feel happy, you're going with the flow. When you feel appreciation, you're going with the flow. When you feel love, you're going with the flow. You're going with the flow of who you really are and that which you have become. Those are the most important words that you'll hear from us here today. Your life is causing you to constantly become more. And the source energy part of you is becoming it instantaneously. And if you go with the flow, you're becoming it instantaneously also. But often you don't go with that flow. You have resistance in your nature because you're trying to utilize some other information to help you know what's the right way for you to go. And we want you to leave this gathering deciding, I'm going to start going with the flow. And how do I know if I'm going with the flow? I can tell by the way I feel. Because when you go with the flow, what's it like? Imagine you get in your rowboat, you get in your beautiful canoe, you put it into the river, and you point it upstream. And you really work hard. That's not going with the flow. Or you turn it with the current, and you go with the flow. And when you go with the flow of who you are, you love others. When you're going with the flow, you're happy where you are and eager about what's next. When you're going with the flow, you're not beating up on yourself. You're not looking into some past experience and beating up on yourself about it. When you're going with the flow, you're not looking at what someone else has achieved and comparing their achievement to yours and then deciding that you're wrong or that they're wrong. When you're going with the flow, you're finding the thought right now that feels like turning the canoe with the current. Going with the flow doesn't mean up here in pure positive energy every moment. It means turned in that direction. In other words, when you put your canoe in the river, you don't sit there and complain, I'm not where I want to be yet. You put the canoe in the river, you know, you're going to paddle and guide it. You're going to be on the water. You're going to go with the flow. You're going to go to that destination downstream that you have in mind. And so wherever you're putting your canoe in right now is wherever you are on this emotional stream. And you might be setting your canoe in down here in an attitude of depression. Something might have happened. You might be feeling powerless. Empowerment is going with that flow. Disempowerment is moving against the current. You can't buck that current. If you don't go with the flow, there's not enough action in the world to make the difference. Have you noticed? Oh, you can turn your canoe upstream and you can paddle for a while. But your muscles are going to get tired and you're going to get discouraged and you're going to stop paddling. And when you do, you'll start going with the flow again. And if you realize that that's all right to let go and go with the flow, then before long, you're joyously creating. But many of you have become so convinced that it is your responsibility to turn that canoe upstream and paddle your heart out forevermore, because after all, there is no gain without pain, they've told you. And nothing comes without sacrifice, they've told you. And what they've really told you, and most of you have been told this enough that you began to believe it, is don't go with your flow, go with mine. Never mind what you want, because you're not smart enough, you're not old enough, you're not in the right church, you're not in the right whatever. You're not wise enough to know. So just do what I say and things will go better for you. And we want you to understand that there really is only one flow for you, and it's getting back in sync with that energy that was you before you were born, and that energy that has never stopped flowing through you, and that energy that always flows toward whatever it is that your genius life has caused you to carve out for yourself. That is going with the flow. If you are not going with that flow, you are feeling the discord of not going with the flow. And that's what emptiness feels like. That's what negative emotion certainly is. That's what that feeling of unfulfillment is. If you don't let yourself be up to speed with who you have become, you don't feel good. Those are such important words. Your life is causing you to become even more than it was when you first got here. Your life is causing the expansion of source through you. And when source goes to that expanded place and you don't go with the flow, you feel unfulfilled. You feel incomplete. You don't feel good. So what we're really saying to you, dear hearts, is you have no choice but to go with the flow if you want to feel good. And that's the bottom line here, isn't it? If you want to feel good, you must go with the flow. Now, you've trained yourself or been trained by others to tolerate not feeling good. You're used to being ornery or feeling out of control. Some of you have adapted to some degree of a feeling of powerlessness. You don't like it very much, but you've adapted. Your mother really liked it better when you went with her flow. And when you didn't, there were repercussions sometimes. And some of you just learned that it was easier to not hold out for what you wanted and to just sort of yield to what somebody else wanted, only to discover years later that you trained yourself not to go with the flow. And then you resent them. You resent your parents. You resent the schools. You resent all of the people who seemed so strong, who were so persuasive in whatever way with their positive or negative offering. And we're here to, we're reaching for the softest word. Inspire. We're going to say prod. We're going to say convince. We're going to say sales job. We're going to say motivate. We're here to help you to remember that you have guidance within you, and you can always tell when you're going with the flow. Now, this emotional guidance scale here at the end that doesn't feel good, that really isn't going with the flow. In other words, there's flowing and not flowing. There's allowing, art of allowing, and resistance. Some of you have made resistance an art. Allowing, resisting. So down here in the resisting place, there are emotions like fear, depression. A little less resistant or a little more going with the flow is revenge. A little more going with the flow, rage. A little more going with the flow, anger. A little more going with the flow, less anger, a little more going with the flow, frustration and overwhelmment, a little more going with the flow, pessimism, hopefulness, a little more going with the flow, optimism, a little more appreciation, love. In other words, you get that? So maybe you put your canoe in today at depression. So what? Turn it downstream. And how do you know that you've turned it to the flow? You feel greater ease. So if you are only analyzing where you are in this flow, and you acknowledge, oh, this does feel better, this must be the right way to go, before you know it, you're going to be flowing all the way back into the liquid love of source. But if you are considering anything else other than, am I going with my flow? Am I in sync with who I really am? Or am I using some other factor to guide me? If you're using any other factor to guide you, like what that guy says, or that guy, or that one, and that one, and that one, or that one, all of those voices from the peanut gallery who need you to perform in certain ways so that they can feel better. And we don't blame them. We understand. We don't blame you for saying, I prefer those circumstances and I would vote for that, I would support that, but I really don't want that. We understand why you want to control the conditions so that you can just observe good feeling conditions and feel better. But that is an endless struggle, and you will never win it, and it is bucking a current, and it is not going with the flow. When it's necessary that one other person behave one little bit differently in order for you to feel better, you have no power. Because even if you can use your power of coercion or persuasion, if your bombs are big enough or your fist is big enough, even if you can use your power of persuasion and get them to agree this time, they won't necessarily next time. In other words, if it matters to you that they change what they do so that you can feel better, you are powerless, and you can feel that in your gut as you are not going with the flow. But when you discover the art of allowing, when you discover that you can, with a little bit of effort, turn yourself in the direction of what you're wanting, and then you get swept up in the current, because when you get into vibrational alignment with going with the flow, it gets better and better and better and better and better. Before you know it, you'll be tuned in, tapped in, turned on in the majority of your moments of life. It's the easiest thing in the world to allow well-being to be. And if you weren't doing that thing you do that is thwarting the well-being, you'd be living well-being on all fronts. And what's that thing that you do that's thwarting the well-being? You're turning your canoe around and you're paddling upstream because somebody taught you that it's virtuous to suffer a little bit. And we're here to tell you it's not virtuous. It's not smart either. Go with the flow. It's the nature of who you are. And you can tell by the way you feel whether you are doing it. And we know that when there is someone well-meaning that is giving you advice and you haven't been practicing for a while going with the flow, that in your insecurity it's easier to listen to them. But we want you to start practicing going with the flow on every subject that comes up until you stand in a place so confident that you never again need to rely on the information of someone outside of you who does not know. We're done. So, that was easy. Now what is it you want to talk about? Some things? Just go with the flow. Not convincing? Start right here on the end, yes.